When you think of Argentina, what comes to mind? Perhaps it's food, wine, meat, dulce de leche, or its culture, the tango, Borges, the city of Buenos Aires. But there's a part of Argentina that you probably know very little about. From 1976 to 1983, Argentina was ruled by one of the most brutal dictatorships in the history of Latin America. It was a regime supported and funded by the United States that engaged in one of the most violent and ruthless campaigns of extermination in the entire 20th century. Argentina had been marked by political instability since 1955, when the military overthrew President Juan Perón and banned his party from taking part in national elections. In the meantime, left-wing guerrillas emerged. Perón returned to the country in 1973 and was re-elected president. When he died the next year, his wife Isabel took power. Amidst an economic crisis, the government supported right-wing paramilitary groups in order to fight the guerrilla movement. Political violence became a top concern. Right after midnight, on March 24, 1976, the Argentine military arrested Isabel Perón, occupied radio and TV stations, and released their first statement. The country was now under military rule. They promised to restore the country to order and end the violence. They even called the new government the National Reorganization Process. Some believe in that promise. The American ambassador called it the best executed and most civilized coup in Argentine history. To the American ambassador, the coup's leader, a general named Jorge Rafael Videla, was a moderate who could actually defeat the left-wing terrorists. After all, the generals who executed the coup were trained by the US military at the School of the Americas. But they had something bigger in mind, because in the end, they had come to do way more than just fight the guerrillas, whom they crushed within a few months. For them, terrorism meant anything that went against their vision of a pure society. Many of them harbored fascist sympathies. Videla himself declared, "A terrorist is not only someone with a weapon or a bomb, but anyone who spreads ideas which are contrary to our Western and Christian civilization." So the generals sought to disappear, kidnap, imprison, torture, kill everyone they saw as a threat. That meant not only those involved in resistance activities, but also trade unionists, Jews, writers, homosexuals, even priests and nuns who worked among Argentina's poor. This was their opportunity to purify Argentine society by force. The military called this repression La Guerra Sucia, the dirty war, a war against a hidden enemy in which any means were justified. Argentina became a theater in a regional terror campaign called Operation Condor. Right-wing dictatorships across Latin America, not just Argentina, but also Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Brazil, pursued a relentless campaign of torturing and murdering leftists. These regimes murdered tens of thousands of dissidents in the most brutal fashions imaginable, and it was all backed, even funded, by the United States. In fact, in 1976, American Secretary of State Henry Kissinger met with the new regime's foreign minister. The Argentine minister thought that Kissinger would lecture him about the military's violence, but Kissinger did not raise the subject. When the minister asked, Kissinger responded that they should simply clean up the problem. According to the State Department, the Argentines saw Kissinger's word as a green light to do whatever they pleased. After the meeting with Kissinger, the repression accelerated. The Argentine military built clandestine detention camps across the entire country to house political prisoners. Prisoners were tortured to obtain information about other political activists. The torture techniques employed by the military were brutal. Rapes, electric prods, beatings. After torture, prisoners were killed and their bodies were burned or buried in mass graves. The Argentine military soon became famous for their so-called death flights, where prisoners were boarded on a plane, stripped naked, dragged, and dropped over the river, with their bodies sometimes washing up on the beaches around Buenos Aires. Even pregnant women were tortured. In many cases, the military executed them after giving birth, stole their children, and gave them to military families. At the same time, the Argentine military government implemented a harsh system of economic reform. The program was received with praise from Wall Street. The president of Chase Bank, David Rockefeller, called it brilliant, solid, and absolutely realistic. Rockefeller was a personal friend of the regime's Minister of Economy, Martínez de Hoz. Argentina abolished price controls, froze wages, liberalized the financial markets, and ended industrial protectionist measures. It was a rapid, neoliberal transformation of the economy, and the consequences of that reform were disastrous. In 1 year, the real wages of Argentine workers fell 30%. Argentine industry went into a deep crisis, and living standards plummeted. One famous journalist, Rodolfo Walsh, wrote of the effect of these policies on the Argentine people in an open letter to the military regime. During the first year of government, consumption of food has decreased by 40%, consumption of clothing by more than 50%, and the consumption of medicine is practically at zero among the lower class. The results of these policies, he wrote, have been devastating. The day after he wrote those words, Walsh was gunned down in the streets of Buenos Aires by the government soldiers. They never returned the body. And in both its violent repression and its economic reform, the Argentine government had the firm support of the United States and the International Monetary Fund. In 1976, the US gave Argentina $50 million in security assistance, while the IMF extended a new loan. In 1977, the US provided about $700,000 to train hundreds of Argentine military officers. And in 1978, the US sold $120 million in military parts to Argentina. It was only when President Carter took office that the United States began to question its role in funding the Argentine dictatorship. An American diplomat, Patricia Darien, wrote a report detailing the extent of the Argentine government's brutality. She said, "The electric picana, something like a supercharged cattle prod, is still apparently a favorite tool of torture, as is the submarine treatment, immersion of the head in a tub of water, urine, excrement, blood, or a combination of these." But others in the US did not care. A Californian politician named Ronald Reagan responded that Darien should walk a mile in the moccasins of Argentine generals before criticizing them. Reagan said that the incarceration of a few innocents is no reason to open the jails and let the terrorists run free. Kissinger went to Argentina as General Videla's personal guest and praised his so-called efforts in combating terrorism. In response to the revelation of torture and murder, the Carter administration cut aid to Argentina from $30 million to $15 million. But after 1979, the US government continued to back the Argentines as the leaders of anti-communist repression in the Americas, even looking the other way as they trafficked money through the United States to fund death squads in Central America. And when Reagan became president in 1981, American support became more explicit. A leading general, Leopoldo Galtieri, was invited to Washington, and Reagan sought to resume arms sales and loans to Argentina. An official in the Reagan administration named Elliot Abrams admitted that he knew that the Argentine government was stealing babies from prisoners and giving them to military officers, but did nothing. But in 1982, amid a failing economy and growing protests, the military government decided to salvage their popularity by invading the Malvinas Islands, a territory occupied by Britain. But they made a big mistake. The US was forced to side with Britain, and Argentina was left isolated. The war went terribly, and the Argentines were quickly defeated. With the economic crisis, the brutal repression, and the failure of the Malvinas War, criticism of the military became more open. By 1983, the military government fell, and a new democratic government was elected. The new government put the military on trial. The Juicio a las Juntas, the trial of the juntas, was unique in the region. But after the trial ended, right-wing violence forced the president to set hundreds of torturers free, imprisoning only the generals. And in the 90s, President Carlos Menem, a neoliberal tied closely to the United States, even pardoned the generals. It was only when leftist governments were elected in the 2000s that many of the generals were imprisoned again. In 2010, Videla died in a prison cell in Buenos Aires. Still, the trauma remains fresh. The survivors of the prison camps, the families of the tens of thousands killed, the children of the disappeared are alive and with us. In Argentina, it remains an open wound, very alive and very painful. But the story was different in the United States. No one who supported the tortures and murders in Argentina, from Henry Kissinger to Ronald Reagan, was punished. Elliot Abrams served in the US government as recently as 2021. Everyone got away with it. Those wounds, too, remain fresh. I'm Pablo Priluca, PhD student at Princeton University for the Gravel Institute.